All right. So, understanding how to maintain balance is necessary for a leader to effectively lead, accomplish a mission, and win. Right. And where this is going is a book review for the Dichotomy of Leadership by Jocko, Willink, and Leif, Babin. Right. And so this is the second book, kind of a sequel. Even though it's not really a storyline, but sequel to Extreme Ownership, the book, another book that I've already done a review on as well. So why read this book? So to take quotes from it directly. So the most difficult and essential element of leadership requires finding balance between opposing forces that exist for every leader, right? And with that being said, here's the front cover so you guys can actually see what it looks like too. To use a quote from a guy that reviewed the book, let's see, Rich Filoni, the nuanced lessons they share in this book will resonate regardless of what you do for a living. Right, so it's kind of it's the principles themselves, and not necessarily just, military related. Which I say that because both Jocko Willink and Leif Babin were served as U.S. Navy SEAL officers, right? And now they have a company called Echelon Front for like leadership development and that sort of thing. And they started that in 2012, it seems. So with that being said, this book was published in 2018, and it's not too long. It's about 290 something pages. So as you can tell, it's not all too thick, but there's that. So what is it really about, right? And so there's kind of three different parts. And there's three different things that a leader must balance, right? According to this book. And that's people, the mission, and yourself. And each one they have, for each one of those parts, they have multiple dichotomies, right? So it's like, to give you a couple examples of what exactly I mean. And so like, it's things like own it all, like extreme ownership, but empower others. But so like, don't own so much of it that you take away from your subordinates or whatever the case may be, right? Resolute but not overbearing. So like, know what you're doing, but don't just like be that helicopter parent to the people you're supposed to be leading, because it doesn't allow them to actually learn or do their job to a certain degree. Things like that. Know when to mentor and when to fire, right? So like, when is someone teachable and they can actually, improve and that sort of thing. But also, if you've basically exhausted all other options and there's no growth whatsoever, then just fire them at that point, right? Those are the types of things we're talking about. And those are all different ways on how to balance people, right? Next they have is balancing the mission, right? And so they have train hard but train smart, right? You don't want to be stupid when you train, period, because that's when you get hurt. That's when people get hurt. There's also a lot of other things that go into it, and obviously I'm not going to go very far in depth with each section because that's what the book's for, right? This is kind of more of an overview and talk about what's in it as well. So next is being aggressive but not reckless, right? Also disciplined but not rigid, right? You don't want to be so rigid that you can't actually, you still have to be flexible with things, and things are going to pop up no matter what you do that you didn't expect or whatever the case may be, but you still have to be disciplined enough to, get the work done and that sort of thing. And extreme discipline is still a net positive, just not to the point to where you become rigid and you can't do anything. And one thing to note with all of these dichotomies especially is each one of these they give like their perspective and like kind of a military framework from the Battle of Ramadi in Iraq, right? And so it's not so much, they give how they learn these lessons, and then they also give like the principle, and they also give business lessons, right? As in like an example in business to where this lesson was applicable. So yes, there's that. And then finally, also, you kind of have to balance yourself to give you kind of the third thing. So as he says, a leader and a follower. And so you have to know, it's like, yes, you're a leader, but you also have to be able to follow, especially like if you aren't kind of the topical expert for whatever task you have to do, right? If there's someone in your group that knows more about it or is more specialized, has more experience in this specific thing, then you should definitely like learn from them for one, but also like kind of let them take the lead to a certain degree, at least in terms of giving you advice and actually, you actually listening to it, especially if they're more experienced in that specific thing. Also, for another one, he says plan but don't overplan, right? Because you have to have a good plan to do anything really, but you can't sit there and just plan for every little contingency, and then basically you have so much baggage on your back, right, that you can't even adequately carry out the mission, right? And I think the example he gave was like he planned for like tried to plan for pretty much every contingency you could think of for a mission, and ended up having so much, like literally carrying so much gear to be prepared for it, that he weighed himself down so much that he was like dying the whole time from carrying it all, just from the sheer weight and trying to move with it. Obviously a very obvious example of literally weighing yourself down, but this can happen also in like, not necessarily like physical wise too, right? Also, for another one, he says humble but not passive. You have to be a humble leader. You don't want to be an egotistical just jerk, I guess. But you also can't be passive and just let things pass by. The whole point is it's called the dichotomy of leadership for a reason, right? And lastly, he says focused but not detached, right? And I'll let a lot of the nuances of each of those sections just kind of be left to you guys to actually read, because it's actually a good book, right? I enjoyed reading to it. And also they have an audiobook as well. The audiobook has a couple extra chapters. So he has remember, basically like remember the fallen warriors, and then winning at all costs, and what it means to win at all costs, right? And he goes into that. They're not that much longer than any of the other chapters, but it's still worth listening to, right? So kind of some final notes. So he says the goal of the book is, with that being said, as he says, the list of dichotomies is endless, and these are just 12, I think, examples of dichotomies you can deal with. But he says, do not overcorrect with the dichotomy do not overcorrect when the dichotomy is unbalanced. Make small iterative corrections, because it is possible to basically just completely flip over to the other side and do that. If you're not, I think, say humble, not passive, or we'll go focused and detached. Say you're so focused at one point that you're basically just like ignoring all the little details, and your team really suffers for it. And then you basically switch to the completely other side and become so detached when you realize you were too focused, that basically the same thing happens, because you're not really paying attention to it, or you're at least not focusing on it, to use the same word in the dichotomy. But anyways, so that being said, make small iterative corrections so that you can slowly kind of get back to balance. And another thing to note is that balance does not last. Sorry. I really didn't want to sneeze in the mic. But so balance does not last, right? And circumstances will change and require constant rebalancing. And so even that middle ground, for lack of a better term, is going to shift depending on situations, people, time, whatever the case may be, right? And yeah, so basically I'm going to leave this one here. I don't want to get too much. It's not that long of a book. And so like I don't remember how long the audio book was, but it wasn't too long. If you would rather just listen to it. But it definitely does a lot listening to their perspective of it, and actually like, listening to them, or I guess reading their words, getting their perspective in general, right? But it's very helpful. And this is one that like you have to go through multiple times, just because it's all story based, which is how people learn, but it's also it's worth retaining, if not for the specifics of each dichotomy, but at least to kind of really ingrain in your mind that there is one to begin with, is a dichotomy, and you can really focus and at least get better with what you're doing now, because ultimately it's pretty much a lifelong thing. It's just always improving and changing and that sort of thing. So with that being said, I'm going to leave this one here. I'm going to put a card up for extreme ownership. Again, here's the cover for this one. And then other book reviews as well, in case you guys are interested in those. So with that being said, I'm going to leave this one here, and I hope to see you guys on one of those.